Is John on?
I am on.
All right.
Does anybody know about Supervisor Morgan was maybe not going to be available?
She was having Supervisor Allen fill in for her, and Supervisor Allen's right here.
Oh, okay. He's working on getting on.
He needs to get on the meeting instead of talk.
Okay.
You get on the meeting.
Jack thought he was filling in for me, but he's really filling in for Barb.
Okay.
I didn't know that. He called me.
So we'll just wait a second for Supervisor Allen to log on, and then we'll start the meeting.
That's John.
Asking to unmute.
No, John. We have Jack in now, so we're able to start.
Okay. Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Was the meeting properly noticed?
Yes.
Okay. Clerk has taken roll call. You have the agenda before you. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any motion by Supervisor Koparski, second by Supervisor Hickether. Any discussion or questions on the agenda? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye and raise a hand.
Aye.
Aye. Those against signify by saying nay. The agenda is approved. We have the minutes from the September 4th meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes that were presented?
So moved.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay.
Who was,
So was that Supervisor Pease with the motion?
Hickether with the second.
Okay. Okay. Motion by Supervisor Pease and second by Supervisor Hickether. Any discussion or questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye and raise hands.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against signify by nay. The minutes are approved. Correspondence, was there any correspondence?
no.
Okay. So we'll move on to the items under discuss and or act. So the first one is Corp Counsel position. And I'll turn it over to Casey just to give an update on where we're at with that.
At this time, we're still continuing with Weld Riley. We did get notice that Attorney Dale is actually transitioning over from Weld Riley to Von Briesen and Roper. So we will be following her over to Von Briesen and Roper. The billing rates will remain about the same. We have had a significant increase in cost, and that has been directly related to we've had a huge jump in the number of legal issues that we've been working on. I believe right now we have something like 5 properties that we're working with legal counsel on in regards to nuisance issues. Obviously, quite a bit going on with school reopening on the CPS side of things. So we've seen quite a jump. The billing has went up substantially in the last month or two. So we're going to continue to monitor that. If that trend continues, then we're going to have to make a recommendation of looking at hiring. So we want to continue to monitor that and see see how we're able to manage that. But if it doesn't start trending back downwards, then we'll definitely be looking at recommending that we go with in-house counsel if we're able to find someone. Any questions or anything about that?
Is Casey, this is Pete. Is that something that will come up at next month's meeting? Will we have a determination by then?
I don't know. I mean, it's obviously going to fluctuate, over and over. So we'll have to see, and that's ultimately going to be your guys' determination if you want to continue that exposure. The feedback I continue to get from department heads consistently is they really like the ability to have multiple attorneys to work with because they all have specialty areas. So the billing rates aren't that high. It's just we have an extremely high volume right now. So they're extremely happy with the service. It's very responsive. It's very beneficial to have what we have, but it comes at a cost. And if we're going to continue seeing these elevated costs, then my recommendation is we have to look at somebody internal, because it's hard to find somebody that has the expertise in all the areas that obviously the county has. So there's still going to be some level, but if we can start mitigating some of that, we may have to do that. So maybe
Casey.
another month or two before we could make a recommendation for you guys.
Can we, or have we negotiated a rate with them?
They do. They have a governmental rate, and we have that on contract. And we also have a governmental rate under contract with Von Briesen and Roper, which is the same. So
Thanks.
both firms have a specific rate as opposed to what they would charge publicly.
Casey, can you give us a range of what that either hourly rate or government rate would be or is?
I believe on the high end it's about 240, and the low end's about 180, depending on which attorneys we're using.
Okay.
So you have multiple attorneys that we're using on the HHS side, and we're also using one or two attorneys on the planning and zoning side, and then obviously on the governmental side, and we also have another attorney that we're using for the litigation side of things. So it all kind of depends on the issue and which attorney gets assigned to the case. And they've been very good. And like I said, the response rate, what we've been getting for turnaround is impressive. So that's the number one complaint before was obviously one attorney handling all of this is completely overwhelmed, and you start seeing a bottleneck. So you're not seeing that bottleneck, and obviously we're seeing committees are being more receptive, like planning and zoning, of trying to fix some of these issues as opposed to our policy before of unless there was a complaint, we weren't going to go after it. Now we're being more proactive. So that has a ancillary cost effect to it.
Okay. Thanks.
And I just want to put it out for committee members if there's any objections into staying with Mindy Dale and going with Von Briesen now instead of Weld Riley. Okay, doesn't look like any, so we'll go that route. So, any other questions on that? Otherwise, we'll go to Section 125, dependent care withholding. Casey, are you going to cover that?
If you guys will remember last year when we had the discussion, we looked at the Section 125, which was withholding for medical and dental. At that time, we made a determination. We only had 10 employees, 10, maybe 15, that were utilizing that anymore since we switched over to the HSA program. and we eliminated all of it with the exception of we still allowed employees to do the dependent care withholding. We talked with our staff, and there was a request that we look at eliminating dependent care withholding. At this point, we have to pay an admin fee. It's a few $100s. And we have one employee who is actually using the dependent care, and they're not even using the maximum withholding. Obviously, dependent daycare is something that you can claim on your taxes as well. So it's not like we're prohibiting them from being able to do it. It was just something that we had the program in place. We just decided to continue to offer the dependent care, but ultimately now the costs are even exceeding the benefits that they would receive by doing that. And they're still able to do the withholding through their income taxes annually. So we would make a recommendation or a request that the committee look at terminating dependent care withholding from an option for the county employees.
Question.
Yes.
If we do eliminate,
Can't hear.
Yes. Yes. So the question was, if we do eliminate this, would it become effective January 1st of the following year? That is correct. All our benefits run on a calendar year. So if you guys do this action and decide to eliminate that, then it would become effective January 1st.
John,
So, yeah.
I'll make that motion to eliminate section 125.
Okay. A motion to eliminate dependent care withholding as of January 1st by Supervisor Hickathur. Do I have a second?
So move.
Okay. Second by Supervisor Pease. Any other discussion or questions?
My discussion would be this. My discussion would be that this gives that employer at least 2 months to decide how to go about doing its own withholding and/or looking to the IRS to get the benefit that way. So, 2 months for that to happen.
Okay. Yeah, and Casey, if we have this, I mean, if we eliminate it now, if there's a bigger need that comes up by the end of next year, we can reinstate it, correct?
Correct. If there was a substantial demand, we could look at reinstituting the program. But from what we're seeing, there's not a whole lot of demand because basically you can claim dollar for dollar onto your income taxes anyways. So it's basically getting it recognized during the year or just recognizing it at the end of the year for the tax deduction. But if there's a significant demand, we'll definitely let you guys know and change that recommendation. It's just at this point, the costs don't warrant the usage that we're seeing.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, then all in favor with the motion signify by saying aye and raise the hands. Aye. Aye. Against, signify by saying nay. Okay, motion carries then. So next we'll move on to the 2021 budget. And before we get into it, Casey, if you'd want to explain to the committee about the process we'll go through and additional meetings we'll have, just so everybody's under the understanding of what the process will be from here on out now. So.
Yep. So essentially what the process is, when the county manager position was created, you guys have a resolution, and my contract state that I am to submit a budget to admin and finance, or submit the county budget to admin and finance for consideration. So that's what today is. Today is the first submittal. Essentially, I have to come back with a balanced budget and for your consideration. So what you've seen over the past month to 2 months is you've seen that the departments have submitted to their committees, and I try to get to all those meetings. If I can, I definitely have Kyle there. We like to get the committee's input in consideration of what priorities the committees have for the departments that they're overseeing. And then we take that in consideration in trying to balance the budget. This year was an exceptionally difficult year, where the board has a priority through resolution that getting the wage and step system put into place is the top priority, so that we've got employees that haven't really seen pay increases for years. So we're trying to get that addressed. That is in the budget that's before you for discussion. We have that fully funded. I think overall, Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, was about $550,000 increase on top of all the other increases that we saw, or increases aren't necessarily the worst thing, especially when we're balancing that against the amount of revenues that we also lose. So our goal is to bring you a balanced budget, because ultimately that's what we have to have moving forward. So some unpopular decisions have to be made, and we'll talk through a couple of those. I know probably the biggest increase, the biggest single departmental increase that we had above and beyond was the sheriff's department. So we'll have a discussion there. And we also have a copy of his letter. We'll go through that and talk through some of the concerns. But ultimately, this is the first discussion, and moving forward, admin and finance is the primary committee that will submit the budget to the county board for final decision. So over the course of the next 2 months, Kyle and I will be going back to the committees and discussing with them what our position is of what changes we've made to each of the budgets that they oversee, and have any discussion that the committees would like to have individually with us on those budgets. So we've met with every single department. Every change that we've made to any of the budget has been conveyed to those departments, so there's no surprises here. The department heads know exactly what budget we're going to be submitting. Whether they agreed with us in changes or didn't agree with us, we'll convey that as we walk through a lot of these budgets. Definitely a big thank you to Kyle. He's done a tremendous job. Obviously, we're going to look at a couple documents here, and they're all hyperlinked to all the documents. So on the left-hand side, you'll see if you click on each of those, that'll take you to the line item budget. Traditionally, we haven't went through those in the meeting unless you guys want to get into that level of detail. But we have a nice summary that we'll walk through the summaries and talk through some of the changes. More than happy if you guys want to have individual discussions with Kyle and I or myself, or if you want to do them as group discussion, that's completely up to you. Ultimately, admin finance and then the full county board have to make the decision on the budget. So we're more than happy to work with you guys to make sure you're understanding what we're recommending, why we're recommending it, and then taking any input you may have on suggestions you'd like to see change. So unless there's any questions on the process, I can start walking through a lot of this. All right, hearing none,
Okay.
we'll start with this summary sheet, and if you'd like, okay, you've got that pull up. Do you want me to just take the screen, Cheryl?
Yes.
All right. All right, everybody should be able to see my screen here. All right, so I'll just kind of walk through them. So what, obviously, you've got the overarching account. What's that? Is that better?
Really
Okay.
good.
All right. So just, this is the department to the county manager. So that's just a summary of what was submitted to us. And then ultimately you'll see any changes we've made, and we being Kyle and I. And then, so you've got their request is the first two columns here. And then you've got the county manager administrative coordinator recommended revenues, recommended expenses, the justification of any changes that we had, and then any changes in the kind of jumping here, any changes in the increase or decrease in department requests. So if we've lowered or increased or lowered their request, then you'll see that specifically what the dollar amount change was. So the miscellaneous budget, no, we have no changes. Obviously, that's a budget that we submit. So those typically get changed depending on how the levy is allocated. That number will change with the levy allocation in some of the other funds back to the general fund. So just for a very high level understanding, on the very left here, 100, everything in the 100 fund is the general fund. And then as we scroll down, after the 100 fund, then you have 200 fund, that's a mediation fund. So there's statutory limitation on the money that's in there and what it could be used for. Land information is 217. Again, that's a specific grant, and we have a committee that oversees that. Jail assessment, commissary, those are statutorily restricted in their use and operated through the sheriff's department. Health and Human Services obviously is a fund of its own because it's a major fund. 245 is a new fund that we're adding. We'll talk about that when we get through this. Library is a standalone fund, obviously. 251 is the library donations. So they have a separate fund that they manage donations because they could have some legal restrictions on them. So they're operating it separately. Highway used to have two funds. Hold on here.
They still do. It's down lower. It's Fund 700.
Yep, they switched it to Fund 700. So originally there was some money that was allocated and was managed through 261 that's been used up. So that was closed out. So now they have Highway Fund of
They
260.
sorry, they still use 260 and they use 700. So
Not
261.
261.
Right, 261. That is when the towns petition the county for road repairs and bridges.
Okay.
There's been no petitions for any funds this year.
And then we have the debt service fund. The Pete Mill Harbor Fund has been used up with the last harbor project. So that project is complete now. You've got the building project. Obviously, we expect that will be expended out over the next year. And then you enter into the 400s are all the capital funds. So those are capital worksheets. That's the correlating backside of all those worksheets of what each department is requesting for capital. And then you have the highway fund at Fund 700, and solid waste is Fund 600 and 626 is their capital. So just kind of high level of what the fund numbers mean on the side. Some of them, they all have different restrictions on how they can be used. So we'll walk through some of these. Just stop me if you guys have questions. So like I said, miscellaneous, that's kind of a catch-all. That's where your property tax revenue, miscellaneous revenues that aren't dedicated necessarily to a specific department are located. Our request, this is a budget that we work on, is used as a balancing between all the funds and all the budgets all together. So that number matches what we're submitting. County board, traditionally that's taken care of as a joint effort between the clerk's office and our office. And so what was submitted, no change recommendations. Clerk of court, the clerk of court did request, the clerk of court did request in her original budget proposal that we add additional staff. They requested that there was chief deputy clerk added, and there was some increased revenue that we did make some changes after the budget submission, that we were notified that revenues would be going up. So we did up the revenue, but we did remove the chief deputy clerk that was requested. And in this budget, we are not actually adding any staff positions countywide. So any questions on the clerk or why we remove that? You want to unmute?
All right, Casey, backing up to miscellaneous. What I did, I put the 2020 budget in a couple columns and the 2021 in another column. You know, we have 11,130,000. That will be the levy. Is that?
No, that's a combination of a
right?
number. That's a combination of a number of different revenues. So I'm pulling it up on the screen for you guys. Everybody's able to see this. You guys see this?
Larger.
All right, I'll make it larger here. So miscellaneous revenue, you've got fund balance in there.
Okay.
So general property taxes, 11,030,000, and then you've got, we're utilizing fund balance. Now that 100,000 of fund balance that we're using is actually the $100,000 that we appropriated for townships to buy election equipment as a loan. And because of COVID and everything else, that project's been held up. So that 100,000 is just being carried over into the 2021 budget. So we're not appropriating additional money to fund that. It's just funding that was not used in this year for a program that we anticipate will get done next year. But other than that, the rest would be the property tax levy for the general fund. Now you'll have property tax levy in other funds as well. So that's not just the general fund.
Casey.
Yes.
And for the committee members, I mean, the one tab on this spreadsheet that I like to, that I found is better to use, where you want to see some of those levy amounts, is the fourth tab that has summary with the levy.
Yep.
So you can see what the 2020 levy amount was and what the 2021 levy amount is. So that's the amount that will actually be on the tax levy.
Yep. So yeah, I pulled that tab up for you guys to see here, and what you'll see is that does fluctuate. Like I said, we use that to balance in between funds. But so you'll see we've got 2020 increase or decrease, and because 20 let's see.
Hold still.
Stay on the left side of it. The stuff on the right is just for when I copy and paste it somewhere else.
So you've got what we're proposing here, and then you've got that 2021 levy. That's the fund balance that we're carrying over.
Where is this located?
So on that
Bring this
spreadsheet,
up.
the spreadsheet that's linked in the agenda,
Yeah.
So this is a tab in that spreadsheet. So here's the agenda.
That's not what
This
I
is
printed off.
That's
Yep.
the 2021. That's the spreadsheet that we're looking at right now. And there's these tabs on the bottom of the spreadsheet.
Well, the one I printed off, Casey, has column 1 is 2021 revenue. Column 2 is
That's
expense.
the department to the county manager budget requests.
Yeah, but I'm not seeing levy on this.
The fourth tab is levy. And then you have levy and
Yeah.
sales tax by fund
Which
in
I
the third
can
tab.
get at. Oh, I can. Where the hell are we?
Katie, if I can ask a question, the clerk of court, you removed the chief deputy. Why?
So the question was, we removed the chief deputy position and question's still coming through. So the question is if we're gonna see this request come back. More than likely, and there obviously the committee had some discussion. Our policy this year was there would be no staff positions added. We had anticipated in the sheriff's department we would add some, but that has changed. The kind of the general gist that we got from the conversation with the committee was that they would look at considering that maybe in the future, in future requests, based on need. So the discussion focused around that there'll be 3 courtrooms, and they have 5 staff currently in that office. So, it came down to a scenario where they have somebody else pick out on leave, and maybe somebody's out on vacation, and they have three courtrooms up and running. Could that potentially become an issue for them? And the bigger question became, if it's something that happens a lot, then I think the committee felt that it was something that they would look at again in the future, but didn't feel necessarily that budgeting for worst case or staffing for worst case scenario was the most prudent way to address the issue. Yes, thank you. All right, Supervisor Gabarski, are we good to go?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll move forward. So county board, like I said, that remained the same. Clerk of courts, we did remove the chief deputy, and we did modify the revenue. Circuit court, the only change there was health insurance came in at 0, and you're going to see that a lot throughout this. So the initial requests were based on a 3% anticipated cost increase in health insurance. After those requests were submitted, we got notice that the insurance company is requesting a 0% increase in our premiums. So that was a change that took place in all departments. Medical examiner, we made no modifications to her request. District attorney, we did have a change in the state funding for the position increased, and obviously health insurance decreased. So that was a downward shift, and that is based on the 3rd district attorney that was added, or the 3rd assistant district attorney that was added last year. The county initially committed to funding that position 100%. It was since picked up by the state. And there was a difference in the pay for a period of time, because the state started that new person at the bottom where we had started them, I believe, at about step 2 of our system. So we're paying a small fraction of that salary, and that will be eliminated in the next year or so as they progress through the pay schedule on the state system.
Casey.
Yes.
Medical examiner went up 18,000 or so. over last year, and then why
Yep.
why was that?
The substantial increase is the on-call pay rate went up.
Okay.
There's not actually any change in staffing or anything like that, but the pay rate, I believe that is dictated by statute, personnel policy. So the policy, the on-call rate we changed, which that affects their budget.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I got more questions, by the way, but
All
not
right.
there.
Corp Counsel, the big change from the initial submittal was health insurance. Other than that, we haven't made any adjustments to that budget. Child support, health insurance, and then we also had updated state funding. So we received notice that there was a change in their state funding. So there's just a small change there to their department.
Yeah, let me-
Casey, can we, go ahead.
sorry, I was going to add to that. When pretty much any time when we update child support expenses, they got to adjust their funding allocation. I was just going to add to that.
I had a question going back to Corp Counsel.
Yes.
We have no revenues in there budgeted.
Correct. That was eliminated in the 2020 budget.
Okay.
So
but I
that
mean,
was-
we do get reimbursements for Health and Human Services, right? Or are the expenses then put somewhere else, or they're just, or no? Am I incorrect in that?
So you used to get a reimbursement from child support.
Okay,
And
that's what it was.
in last year's, in the 2020 budget, that was cut as the state cut some of that funding. So we no longer do the reimbursement and use that to offset wages in child support.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
So-
There was no HHS revenues though.
Okay, and maybe it was child support. So
Yeah, it was
but
child
it's in
support.
it's in the child support revenues then. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
My question is, in child support, we say, update and state
I'll let
funding,
Kyle
is
explain that one.
increase or decrease in state funding, and I'm good when you say that.
So what also changed in between there was the indirect cost plan. We got the final numbers for our indirect cost plan. So then Janet had to update her numbers from her original submittal.
And indirect cost plan is?
Oh, sorry. So we have to put together an indirect cost plan for like health and human services and for child support so that they can recognize those indirect costs when applying for grants. We look back at 2019 actual costs for developing the indirect cost plan that we use for 2021. So your indirect costs would be like treasurer's office, county manager's department, that type of stuff.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions on child support or the earlier ones? All right. County clerk. We had no change other than health insurance. County treasurer. We did have a couple different changes there. Obviously, health insurance was one of them, but we also increased revenues. Let's pull that up real quick just to show you guys directly what we did. Janny was being extremely conservative in her estimates. So we just we made a few changes to what she had submitted, and I don't necessarily disagree. I like that our departments are being very conservative in their proposals, but we did make a change to The interest income, interest on taxes, I believe were the two that those were the two that we changed. There we go. So the interest on taxes, originally, Janny's submittal was for 175,000, and we're changing that back to 200,000. What we're seeing, obviously, we've actually had a very good year on people paying their taxes on time, but traditionally we're seeing substantially more than what we're budgeting for. And looking at the percentage change in additional properties that have been paid off, it's not proportionate to the amount of the decrease. We're budgeting 225 and we're bringing in 250, 260. So we do agree there should be a decrease, just not $50,000. We believe the number, if it stays proportionate to history, should be more in line with the 200,000. Actually, we think that's a little low. And then we also did an adjustment on their requested proposal was about 75,000 for penalties on taxes, and we're coming back at 100,000. Looking at history, traditionally they're coming in at about, I think it was like 140 was the number that they traditionally see. And again, looking at the amount that she anticipates not being there anymore, it's not proportionate. She's anticipating a 10 to 15% decline, and they're typically bringing in 140, which is about 40% more than what we're currently budgeting. So looking at that, I think we're safe sticking with our current budget numbers. So, and we did discuss that. She did agree, but obviously I can't fault our departments for trying to be extremely conservative, but I think it's more in line with what we will see based on the trend history of those revenue line items. So those were the big changes in the Treasurer's Department. Obviously, health insurance was also adjusted. Any questions on that? All right. Maintenance, health insurance cost adjustment was our biggest change in that department. Obviously, Bill had quite a bit of shuffling around, but it netted out to, I believe, no cost. He had some changes in his capital and balance that out between his regular budget and the capital budget, but we did make just that change for health insurance. Register of Deeds, again, health insurance came in and we did make a little bit of change in Jody's revenues there. Again, traditionally Jody's very, very much exceeding her revenue projections. So we brought this more in line with her long-term trend history of her revenues. Obviously, this year is kind of the outlier. We've seen departments that have drastically exceeded their revenue projections. COVID obviously is driving that, but we've also seen other departments that are way under. So we're trying to kind of ignore that this year as the outlier in those revenue anticipations. County surveyor, no change in that budget. And I believe that budget's been pretty static for 3 or 4 years now. That's been the same budget. So no changes there. The Sheriff's Department budget, anticipate spending a little more time on this. We have changed a number of different things. We've had a couple different meetings with Brent and his staff. We on the grant side, we have an increased grants. They have just a basically catch-all throughout the year. The sheriff's department is very successful in obtaining additional grants. Traditionally, it's $20,000-$30,000 of grants that they didn't anticipate getting, and they end up getting. So we just stuck a $10,000 budget figure in there. We don't know specifically what grant he's going to get, but what we see is every single year, the sheriff's department always gets additional grant revenue. So we wanted to make sure that that's in the budget and recognized. We don't know for sure what it'll be, but we know it will be substantially higher. Decreased jail food and decreased jail medical expenses. Kind of a twofold with those two issues. Decreased jail food. Obviously, we had the contract with Wood County was cut, so you have 10 inmates a day less. We are going to see, I believe, a 3% increase in jail food cost. However, we're budgeting for having those 35 inmates in the jail at all times, so that has come down. So we've adjusted the jail food to recognize that. Jail medical, obviously, we'll see a decrease there also with less inmates there, but Sheriff York did a very good job in negotiating a contract reduction overall. We're actually going to have less jail medical staff there just because of the population being so low, which is a positive thing for the budget. So that's recognized here. We did have 3 new positions in the initial budget request. Those 3 new positions had a net cost increase of over $300,000. And as we went through this budget process, I know there were positions that we had said that we would fund. They were completely dedicated to courthouse security. So there were 3 screening positions. And going through this, the budget, we got to a situation where we would have to make cuts to other departments to come up with the funding that we needed to fund these 3 courthouse security positions. So we did start exploring alternatives to the proposed positions and try to figure out another way to address this. A number of other counties use a security firm called Permar. And Permar, we did talk to them. They submitted a quote on what it would cost to do that, to have 3 staff on site. So that would give us 4 total staff dedicated to jail and courthouse security. The contracted staff, their only role would be screening at the entry into the building. No other responsibilities would be shifted to the sheriff's department. So with the change of practice of screening everyone that comes into the courthouse, we felt this picked up any and all workload that would be added to the sheriff's department, and they would still have a staff member that could be dedicated just to courthouse security and court security. So we didn't change that at all. And then we did make some wage adjustments. I can't get into the specifics on the wage adjustments. We will have to go into closed session, but they are reflective of union negotiations, proposals that have been made. So we do need to set up a special meeting Monday or Tuesday, hopefully, of the Admin and Finance Committee to go into detail on what's reflected in the wage adjustments.
Casey,
Yes.
sheriff's budget, and you mentioned about the grants, but yet the revenue went down
Substantially.
Yes.
Yes, you had, so your biggest loss there is the Wood County contract.
Okay.
So that was presented to PS&J, so that's not an adjustment that we've made. But fortunately, Sheriff York was successful in saving 15 of the, I believe there's 15 inmates they're paying for daily, as opposed to they were trying to terminate the contract in total. So, and we do get first right of refusal on any additional inmates that they would house out. So, you know, fortunately, it wasn't a total loss of revenue, but yes, there's a substantial decrease as a result of that.
But on the flip side of that, on the expense side, we have gone up about 230,000.
Correct. And the initial request far exceeded 300,000 or 500,000, sorry. So those adjustments that we've
those
made,
3 positions were not
they're
there.
300,000. Those 3 positions were 300,000, over 300,000.
But
That
that
puts
wasn't
you
in
over.
last year's budget either. So there's got to be something else beyond that, doesn't there?
Yes, we'll talk about that more in closed session.
Okay, all right.
Casey,
Moving
it's
on.
Pete. I have a question. Have we been in contact with Permar Security?
What's that?
If we got a firm bid, have we been in contact with Permar Security?
Yes, we had a conference call with Permar. We did have Sheriff York, myself, I believe Kyle was on there. Supervisor Gabarski as chairman of PS&J committee was on there. And we had a pretty good conversation with them. Obviously, Sheriff York, his opinion, and I provided his letter. He would like to see full-time staff. I do appreciate that. I understand that. I think that would be the position of everyone. Unfortunately, paying for it's another issue, and that's ultimately a decision we have to make is, do we cut staff in other departments to have full-time deputies sitting there, or do we look at we're increasing workload by adding screening, and we're addressing that additional workload by having armed security guard, or not armed, but security guards that will do screening. And if there's an issue, they're going to have to call the sheriff's department or notify the sheriff's department. And that's honestly the current practice is, if there's any issues in the courthouse, we notify the sheriff's department. And the staff that the sheriff has are exceptional at responding and helping address any issues in the courthouse. So that shouldn't add any additional workload to the sheriff's department. I know the sheriff had additional work to alleviate some of the burdens on some of his other staff that in inmate movements, things like that. But that's not something that's additional burden being added to their department by adding screening.
Thanks.
Any other questions on the sheriff's budget? All right. We've got emergency management. We increased the fund balance applied for one of the projects that she has slated to be done next year, and then a small adjustment based on health insurance to the expenditure side. Okay. IT and HR and county manager's budget, no adjustments that we're making from the initial that went to committee, other than the health insurance being at no cost increase. Airport, we met with the airport, and looking at their trend history and usage, we did recommend increasing their airport fuel sales by what, $5,000. So nothing significant, and we made no changes on the expenditure side of things. Vet service, the initial budget that was submitted, we had made some assumptions about the position being filled. The position got filled. The employee hired made different elections. So the decrease in expenditure is completely based on health insurance elections, and no actual cost change into the initial request that they've made. We did make several changes based on parks. Again, parks is using a nominal amount of sales tax and is using no property tax to fund their operations. But we did make some adjustments that actually decreased the amount of sales tax that we're putting into their funds. And that was just based on long-term user history and the trends that we're seeing. Obviously, again, this is another department that's seeing record high utilization. So this year's revenues are definitely an outlier from what we typically see. But again, very positive year for the Parks Department. UW Extension, we made no changes. GIS, we made no changes. Land and Water, the only changes that we made were the updated health insurance election. Planning and zoning, there's another one. We're seeing record trends in people taking out building permits, things like that. So this year was the first year that they actually broke out the different types of permits they had. So we're able to track those a little better and start establishing a better trend history individually for those. And based on that and the discussion with Dustin, we decided that we would up some of those revenues to better reflect what we think is going to be more of the history with those. And then we have the miscellaneous fund. Decrease in state shared revenues. So that was your, we received that from the state here. Budgeted miscellaneous revenues and insurance recoveries. We haven't budgeted those in the past. Traditionally, we get those, so we are forecasting based on trend history there. Decrease in accounting costs. We decreased the fair and exhibits. Their initial request was we did a one-time funding increase last year to help offset the cost or help cost share the fence replacement at the fairgrounds or the fence installation. So we took that back out for 2021's budget. And then the holiday funding tree was its own line item, and we added that into the Chamber of Commerce because ultimately that's where we fund that through. We received notification from North Central Regional Planning that their dues increased, so that's reflected in the changed amount there. Contingency fund, we're sitting at $64,888, and that's decreased to balance the budget from, we had 100,000 in there, and we've just used that kind of as our offset for balancing at this point in time. Again, mediation is its own fund, no changes there. Land information is its own fund, standalone, and it's restricted to grant usage. So no changes. Jail assessment, commissary, no changes. Health and Human Services. Kind of hard scrolling here, sorry. So Health and Human Services, we did change a few different things in our meeting with them, but ultimately we did have some changes in their proposed revenues, and then obviously health insurance coming in lower. So obviously that HHS is another one where you'll see expenses going down, and then you're also going to see revenues that go down. And it's not going to be, it's going to depend on the reimbursement rate for each of those positions. So some of them may be we go down $1 in expenditures, you may see 50-cent reduction in revenues because they're a 50% reimbursement. And then we have other positions that may be a 20 or 30% reimbursement. So when you see the cost decrease, you're also going to see revenues decrease in some of those. We created a new fund, or we're proposing to create a new fund, and it would be committed in the fund balance policy, it'll fall under committed. So essentially by the board adopting the budget with this in there, you're committing $50,000 a year to be, we're calling it RAS orders. Essentially, what we have departments doing right now is kind of arguing over who has to bear the cost of razzing properties that are ruled to be inhabitable. You've got public health issues, those types of orders. We have planning and zoning that issues those types of orders. Right now, planning and zoning budgets for those to some extent. So we had a good discussion, especially we've had a few properties that have become issues. So what we are proposing to address the issue of who pays for it is to create a fund, and that fund will have money in it. Ideally, those costs would be specially assessed back against the property and would be reimbursed, and they would come back into this fund. Obviously, sometimes that never recoup the money, but ideally, through the special assessment process, you would recoup that once the property was resold. So our proposal is to add a new fund, funding it with $50,000 to begin with, and that those funds would then be used when there's an order to demolish a property. Those would be the funds that would be used instead of running it through an individual's department, and then they have to bear that in their budget. Any questions on that? Okay, library. The library is, we haven't made any changes. Obviously, the library has its own statutory exemption for levy limit increases. We did make one change because health insurance came in less than what was initially proposed when they reviewed it. One thing I do want to discuss is the library is looking at using leftover funds from this year's budget to offset some of the levy need that they would have in a subsequent budget. That's a one-time utilization. I believe $7,000, Kyle.
No, it's a little over 2,000, I believe.
2,000. Okay. So the discussion would be next year they would look at increasing their levy request by an additional 2,000 to make up for the funds that they carried over in this year's budget. So the question to you guys would be, is that something you want to consider, or it's a one-time use and we don't want a levy increase next year as a result of that? So that's something in the 2022 budget you'll have to consider. Their board ultimately approved doing that for this year, but if they do not cut that out of their budget, then they'll be requesting additional levy funds next year. And that would be, they're exempt from levy limits. So that would be something that admin, finance, and ultimately the full board will have to make a decision on. Donation funds with no change there. Highway funds, highway fund, they're right now, the significant change that was made in their budget request, they made a request last year. We received a pretty nice increase in our highway aids. We anticipate those are obviously going to be lower as most state revenues are this year. So we actually reverted them back to their 2019 levy amount. So they're getting more in levy than they did in 2020, but ultimately they're getting the same level of revenues. We still have not gotten notice of what our highway aids are going to be. So that right now is a substantial unknown that could have a positive or a negative impact, but we anticipated a loss. That's why we went back to the 2019 levy amount, so that hopefully we're being overly conservative, but we have no idea what the state intends on doing, and they really haven't given us any indication at this point. Debt service, we're currently looking at $1,455,525. No change there. The building project, we anticipate by end of year, there's going to be about $4 million left. That should all be expended by the end of June, July timeframe, depending on project wrap up. But that's the remaining funds that are dedicated for the phase one project. Medical examiner, that's just putting away funds to replace the vehicle when that reaches the end of its useful life. Let's see. The Petenwell Harbor, like I said, that project's done. So that ultimately will go away. Maintenance capital, we're not making any changes. Like I said, Bill did make some adjustments between his operating budget and his capital. It nets out to about zero. So we really didn't have any issues with what he intends on doing there. The sheriff's capital budget, there was a substantial increase in requests there. And we've talked with the sheriff a number of different times. I know he has a differing opinion on things, but we removed equipment related to the positions from the operating budget, separated out vehicles by type: admin, transport, patrol, rec, and canine. We saw a substantial increase in the levy requested to fund the equipment in the sheriff's department. Obviously, like I said, we do not have the capacity to raise additional revenue. So we have to work within some pretty stringent revenue guidelines. So in an effort to offset that need and still meet the need of the department, we're proposing that they switch from the traditional Ford Explorers to the Durango Pursuit. And Kyle, where did you have that at? And I just want to illustrate. No. Is it tied to his budget? Oh, his budget. Okay. There we go. All right. So this is what we're looking at as far as replacement and trying to. I know there's a strong desire to get a consistent fleet. Wood County is currently switching a lot of their vehicles to the Ram 1500, which are pickups. Right now on the state bid, those vehicles are bidding out at about $28,000 a vehicle. And with install costs about $6,000, we have 20 vehicles to replace overall over the next 5 years. So you're looking at 680,000. With obviously they're going to have a higher resale value, so that the net levy that we would need for Ram trucks would be 121,000 versus the Dodge Durango Pursuit, which is what we're recommending. It's kind of the in between. You're looking at 138,000, and then for the Ford Explorers, you're looking at annual need of about $150,000. So we're looking at making a recommendation again of the Durango Pursuit. The sheriff obviously has a differing opinion, and like I said, I do appreciate the sheriff's opinion. We're trying to do what we can with the fiscal resources we have available to meet his needs. There was some discussion in regards to Ford Interceptors have a tag that's called police rated, and the Durango Pursuit has a SSV rated. Is that what it was called?
Actually, I believe both the Ford Interceptor and the Durango, they're both Pursuit rated.
Pursuit rated. Okay.
Yep.
And we did reach out to the insurance company to try to better understand, because the Dodge Durango or the Dodge Ram is a SSV rated, which is not Pursuit, and we're trying to figure out what liability we would have as an employer if we were to use one vehicle over the other. And the insurance company responded that there would be no liability between the county having one of those vehicle types over the other. So, like I said, our recommendation is that we go with the Dodge Durangos, and then provide funding based on switching our fleet over to Durangos as they're the most cost effective. I know it's not necessarily what the sheriff necessarily wants, but like I said, yeah, it's substantial. It's a big annual cost savings for the county to look at that as well. So I know this has been run by the sheriff. Like I said, he's not necessarily supportive of it, and it's definitely an ongoing discussion that'll need to take place as we move forward with him as well. So any discussion or questions in regards to our recommendation there? All right.
Casey, this is Jody Shapey. Are you there?
Yes.
Casey, I'm just curious. I put this in the chat. Would the keys be interchangeable between the fleet vehicles for the sheriff's vehicles?
And that was a question that Sheriff York had brought up as well. And I don't know. We would have to work with the dealership to better understand how they do their keying. That I don't know. But I know
Would we be finding that information out sooner rather than later?
Yeah, I mean, how much legwork do we put in beforehand on those smaller details if it's something that the board doesn't even want to consider? And that's kind of our position. That's why we're proposing this. If that's something that the board is interested in moving forward with, then we'll work with the vendor to try to come up with a solution that best meets the sheriff's needs.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Anyone else? All right. Our emergency management, we had no changes. Jane does have some pretty aggressive projects over the next couple of years, so those have been in the plan for several years now. So no changes there. IT capital, we did look at a one-time infusion of sales tax revenue to help fund a project that won't have an ongoing levy need. So instead of using levy, we'll use sales tax to offset that. Our goal with using sales tax is to use it in a manner that there's not an ongoing commitment of it, because obviously sales tax is a use tax and that's going to fluctuate. So we try to buy down like the building project, buy down the cost of the building project by using sales tax, so we don't have to use property taxes, and it's a one-time cost, and then manage it going forward. HHS again is looking at their vehicle.
I have a question about
Yes.
that, Casey. This is the second time you mentioned using sales tax revenue, because I think you mentioned it in parks also. Could you tell us what that amount is? Those dealership departments are going to use that sales tax revenue?
Yep, actually, we'll talk specifically about sales tax once we get through this. We got a tab on here for sales tax. Yep. So HHS Capital, like I said, that's their vehicle replacement. The other big use or big change that we made from what was submitted to the individual committees was we had solid waste. We did do several different changes to solid waste. This actually took place yesterday morning. We were going back and forth with a recycling manager. There's been a huge issue in filling the contracted positions that we have. So in an effort to minimize costs and make sure that we have the staff needed, we did increase the contracted services line item to make sure that he has the 6 FTEs, and he will be able to fund those 6 FTE positions. So that is reflected in the budget. We offset that with the recycling revenue, and then obviously we updated wages to address the changes in health insurance. On the capital side, we're currently looking at bidding on 3 separate townships for curbside recycling and curbside garbage collection. If those projects go through, they would become dedicated. We'd be dedicating equipment specifically to those contracts. Those would be one-time upfront purchases, and then the contracts going forward would then support the equipment replacement program that we would have in place. So we're looking at the initial purchase. Instead of just buying general garbage trucks, we'd look at the automated trucks. Their cost is a little bit higher, so we'd be looking at a one-time outlay for 2 trucks. We would actually eliminate several of our trucks as a result of switching the equipment over. The benefit: you're buying a more expensive truck. You're eliminating some of your rear load packers. We wouldn't have to buy those anymore. But the bigger benefit is one staff member can operate that vehicle. So you no longer have a truck where you have to drive around with a driver and a jumper, which obviously is something that makes them more efficient. It lets us be able to take on additional services without having to add staff, and definitely helps us maintain the staff that we currently have. So all around, that's a pretty positive program that we're looking at there. Any questions on the changes that we've made to the budgets that were submitted to the committees? All right. No. All right, we will switch to the 2020 comparison as opposed to the 2021 budget. So you've got a good summary. Let's see if we. So you can see, I won't go line by line through all of these. You'll see there's decreases, increases, all the way down through what's being requested. So this is basically the budget request or recommendations versus 2020's budget that was approved. And this is something that's been discussed with each committee, so I don't know how much time we want to spend talking through that. Hearing none, I'll move on to the levy and sales tax. So you have by fund, you have a what we're using 2020 versus 2021. So the general fund, you see a 1.26% increase in the amount of levy, 6.2% in HHS. Libraries, and they're requesting. Library would be the only thing that's actually increasing the levy here. Everything else we balance out. Obviously, the county is limited to net new growth only. So overall, we will see a 0 for our actual levy increase. We're just getting net new construction. So I believe the mill rate will drop again this year from what it was in prior years. So if your property stayed the same, you'll see a decrease in your property tax, your county property taxes. But overall, we're not increasing the levy at all. Any questions on that? You're muted.
On the highway, differences here, is that for resurfacing certain roads like County M and so forth? Is that where the increase came?
No, if you remember in the discussion about their budget, um, we increased their levy back to what they received in 2019 because in the 2020 budget, we cut it because of the additional state aid. So their levy increased 5.9% back to what they received in 2020. Actually, I don't think they've received additional levy since 2015.
I'm sorry, which department?
Highway.
Rich was distracting me. Highway. Yeah, it's been longer than 15 actually, or longer than 2015, I should say.
So
I
they're
was just
operating.
I was concerned because some of our county roads, M comes to mind, is in the sad state of repair. And I mean, it starts way over the county line. Now, I know you've got some of that in the budget for upcoming years. So just so we keep up on it, that was a concern.
So yes, we do have some of that in the budget. However, we're trying to work within the means that we have. So again, we're just trying to get them back to where they were. And highway's been one area that hasn't really gotten much funding at the county level because of our levy limits. It becomes a situation of what department are you going to cut to make it all work. So our goal is to try meeting the needs of the departments and keeping them whole. And with highway, obviously County M is the top priority project. It's just we don't have funding to address it as quickly as we'd like to. We have it phased in over a multi-year plan. I believe we're doing 1 to 2 miles a year to get those addressed. But that's about all the funding that we have. We put it in for grants and things like that, but we haven't been able to get additional funding to help get that project done in total.
Let me ask you this then, Casey. The 0% increase, that's a county goal. That we're not restricted by the state to stay at 0, are we?
No, you're not. But the state bars you from raising additional revenues. So you can go issue debt and go raise taxes that way, but that's really your only way of raising additional tax revenue. We're barred from increasing our levy over net new growth. So net new growth for Adams County is about $130,000. The wage increase alone is $550,000. So we had to work that into the existing budget. You've got, the sheriff's department. I totally understand and I totally agree that maybe he likes or his deputies like a certain type of vehicle, but in looking at you've got a over $60 million budget and we've got $130,000 of additional revenue to address all needs in the county. Now, if the county so desired that it wanted to get Highway M completely done, we have the authority and the capacity to go issue bonds and raise taxes, which obviously then adds interest and issuance costs. So you're looking at $200,000-$300,000 of additional costs to do that, or we work within the means that we have available. Unfortunately, it's not enough. So that's why, Kyle and I are kind of stuck in this unfavorable position of trying to maintain services and address the needs in all departments, recognizing that there are substantial needs. And, if you've got, all the parks, the land and water's got all the dams, there's numerous projects, we've got numerous community groups that want us substantially contributing to water projects. All are very important projects. It's just, we do not have the revenues to address all these issues. So we're trying to balance it as best we can.
But you hit a key right off the bat before you got into everything else, and that's the wage increase. And the fact is that supposedly we're going to keep employees longer, and it's ultimately going to be less demanding financially than training them and letting them lead. So I mean, we've been through all that. That's part of the sacrifice on the budget, that we can't do other things. That's just the way it is. That's
Everything has an opportunity cost, yes. Especially when we're as limited as we are. Any decision we make, any priority that we set is going to have a cost of not doing something else in the budget.
Sure.
All right. Any other questions on the levy distribution? Okay, and the increase, that 1.1%, is strictly limited to the net new growth and library. So the library is the only real increase. The net new growth is or not net new growth, net new construction. The net new construction for the county, I believe, was what, 1.07?
Yeah, it was just slightly over 1%. I'd have to look it up for the actual number.
Yeah, so the rest of that is an actual tax increase being proposed by the library, which is exempt from levy limits. So the discussion was, what do we anticipate doing with sales tax for 2021? So you'll see 2020 sales tax right now. In 2020's budget, we're using $1,183,747. In 2021 sales tax projections, we're projecting that we'll create that fund for the RAS orders. The anticipation is that money would be replenished through special assessments against the properties that are raised. So we've got 50,000 there. You've got debt service. That dropped substantially as we continue to pay off our debt. You've got the emergency management capital. We're doing a one-time funding there of $79,200 to buy down one of the projects that she's doing in lieu of using property tax. And then after that, that would go away. IT would be doing a one-time funding of $100,000, and that would get rid of the accrual that we're looking at an ERP software system. The way the different companies that work on those ERP is you get the updates in the software, so you don't have a software update or a software repurchase in the future. So we won't have to put away money for software repurchase by keeping our user licenses current. So that is a one-time use of that money as well. Park capital, because they're so far behind, we're using some of the sales tax to try to get their capital funds back where they should be. And then solid waste, we've got 420,000 in there, like I said, for those articulating trucks. And then that expenditure would happen if those contracts go through. It's about an 8 to 12 month outlay for to receive those trucks. So it's pretty far out. So we're looking at using a little more sales tax revenue than we did last year. We're looking at, ultimately, sales tax is what's being proposed to fund the bulk of the new expansion. If phases 2, 3, and 4 were to happen, we would use sales tax to offset that. We're comfortable at about 1.5 million. We believe is a very sustainable amount without much fluctuation. Right now, sales tax was about 1.8 million last year. We're anticipating it's to be about 1.8 million again this year. We're not really seeing the drop off that many areas of the state are seeing. So we're very comfortable in our projections. So that $500,000 that would be left over will actually just go into the debt service fund and can be reallocated by the board as needed. And like last year, we ran into the issue where we had those huge snowstorms that kind of overwhelmed the costs for the highway department. we did a one-time transfer of 500,000 into the highway department to offset those costs. So I think we've been very successful. We used the money to fund phase 1 of this project, of the courthouse expansion project. So there's no additional cost to the taxpayers. And going forward, we anticipate we'll continue using that for one-time needs, and obviously offsetting the cost of debt service, so we're not passing that on to the property taxes as we currently are. So any question on the levy or sales tax distribution? That cover everything?
I do have a question about the capital part. I can't believe you said that we have usage of as much as we do in the parks capital area. We're still using.
What's that?
Every bill amount with $100,000 next year. Can you speak to that? That we're still giving them $100,000 of sales tax, but you said our usage is up in all our parks. So how come we have to give them that kind of money?
So the bigger issue is there wasn't a whole lot of long-term planning that was done prior to 2018 when we instituted these practices. So every committee gets an opportunity to give their input in on the capital requests made by their departments. So we have every single department fills out these worksheets for every single asset that the county owns. We have a worksheet and we allocate money to replace that. So we tried to switch the conversation from, how do we take from one department to give to another department? We kind of switched all of that to, if, like in this case, this is mowers. So obviously they need mowers. So the conversation's more about, once the committee and the county board agree that mowers are needed out there, we make sure that the funding is put away to replace those mowers over the useful life. So when it reaches the point that it's no longer usable, they have the money to just go buy it, and we don't have to look at cutting from another department to fund those. So that never took place. Obviously, we have great parks facilities, but there wasn't a whole lot of planning in replacing them. So even though they've done very well, there wasn't a whole lot of money that was put away to replace any of the facilities that were out there. So what we're doing is slowly using sales tax to help get them up to the point that they've got funds, substantial funds, to help replace their facilities. This year, we're putting in, we try to adjust that. We have the plan that's adopted by the board. And what we do is that number fluctuates each year based on the amount of revenue they have. Because obviously there's revenue sensitivity. So to get it all the way up to where we need, raising an additional $100,000 on user fees is going to be very unpopular. So, so obviously as we open additional campgrounds, that's going to open up, more need, but it's also going to generate additional revenue. So it's a slow process getting them to the point where they're completely self-sustained, but that's what we're working towards.
Casey, I think this year is the only time we have not used levy money. We've just used sales tax for the parks.
No,
correct?
They've been off the levy for 3 years now. This is the third year.
3 years we would use levy money.
Yep. So when Kyle and I started in talking with the board,
okay, thank you.
The board was concerned that we're using so much property tax to fund parks and solid waste. So that has been our goal, is to get them off of the levy. We did that with the parks about 3 years ago. Obviously, we don't have the ability to move, large chunks of money to fund what should have been funded years ago. So we're slowly doing that with sales tax. So that, like I said, that amount, it changes every year based on what our revenue projections are. And we're just offsetting that instead of using property taxes. So, and we have kind of the same theory in what we're trying to transition to in solid waste, and then ultimately get rid of that levy altogether. You'll see there's a big decrease in the levy that we've had in solid waste. That was more of a one-time funding that we did in the past, trying to get them caught up again because they're so far behind. So any other questions there? All right. And then that last tab is just a summary of how the levy is allocated based on our recommendation. So, and then a percentage of how much is going to each department, all that good stuff. So any additional comments or questions?
John, it's Pete. Casey, I think that's a great job considering the year we're having with COVID and everything and things being shut down, not operating normally, to put together a budget that's that close. I think that's great.
Yeah, this year was probably the most challenging so far. You know, there's a lot of unknown out there, and you know, the turnover that we've seen, we've got to address wages. I mean, that's the number one priority. You know, what was it? 65% of our employees are here less than 10 years. So in this type of rural county, that's something that's pretty rare. So, and that's a direct result of people come here, they get the training and they leave. And that's something that we're trying to correct by addressing the salary situation. So I definitely concur that is our top priority, and that's kind of the priority we've taken through the budget. You know, it's a balancing act. Like I said, I know the sheriff had the biggest request for increase, and that's kind of why we've made some of those changes to still address his need, but still recognizing the need of all the other departments too. So if it comes to a situation where the board feels that they need to increase for one department over another department, I think, you know, what we've been able to do is not pit departments against each other, but work with them all. So if there's a decision to reallocate funding differently, then, you know, that's going to come at the expense of another department. And that's something that I think the board is going to have to make that decision.
And just looking at this, I know it's a lot of information that they provided us, and you know, the initial overview, and Casey mentioned the need to have another meeting on either Monday or Tuesday next week in a closed session to discuss the union contract for the sheriff's department. So we can have the 2021 budget on there too. So if there's something, you know, that you look at over this weekend and want to have any other discussions on it, and, you know, we'll have it on the next month's at the next meeting's agenda too, and besides the closed session meeting too. So we can discuss anything that we want. And as Casey mentioned, you know, him or Kyle are available for personal questions if, you know, you don't want to have it in the meeting. Yep. You know, questions in the meeting. So,
and going forward, so we don't have to run you guys through all of this going forward. What we'll do is, if we do make changes to the budget, obviously as things trickle in, the biggest unknown we have right now is highway aid. So once we get that, we'll make an adjustment to the budget. But going forward, anytime we make an adjustment, every time we talk about the budget, what we'll do is we'll give you a summary of what changed from the last time we talked to you. So you'll know exactly what's different from the last time.
Any other questions or discussion on the budget? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on. There's no action to take on this at this time. So the next item on the agenda is payroll withholding actions. Casey?
Yep. And that was just a continuation from the discussion we had at the last meeting. The president did sign into, or he signed a executive memorandum directing the Treasury Secretary and to no longer collect the 6.2% of employee pay from employees, but still continue to collect the employer amount. We did put that legal opinion from Bond, Breezen, and Roper, and we continued to withhold because that is federal law and that is the federal requirement. There was some question about whether or not the president's action had any legal authority. And essentially what we're hearing statewide, I'm not aware of any counties in the state of Wisconsin that are actually complying with that. And like I said at the meeting before, we have a monthly meeting to discuss COVID with several of the businesses, the schools, municipalities, and the response there was nobody that was doing it at that time. There were some that were still going through the analysis, but so we're not aware of anyone that's actually doing it. I know the state was talking about it. I've talked to several state employees that were looking at their employers were doing it or whatever department they were in, but we have not done it at the county. I do not recommend doing that. Our legal counsel, Weld Riley, Mindy did chime in at the meeting, and her interpretation was the same as Von Breezen's, and her legal conclusion was right on par with the risks and liabilities we would assume by participating if an employee were to leave. So we have not changed our practices. We'd put this on the agenda just in the event that you guys wanted to take action. You don't necessarily have to. It's completely up to you guys on what you wanted to do or if you wanted more of a discussion on it.
And I think we put it on the agenda just in case there was some legislative action taken by the federal government to, not have to repay it down the road, but that hasn't happened at this time yet, correct?
No, none of that's happened. There's been no action. Like I said, it sounds like it's pretty intermittent of who's actually not withholding that.
Okay, so we'll put it back on the agenda if we need to do something to take action if something does change. So moving on then, we have committee goals for 2021 that we said we'd carry forward. Any committee members have any ideas for actions or goals that we'd have for 2021? One item I thought of is to have some discussions and goals for looking at capital improvement plans, over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. So knowing that we are in the midst of the one building project, but that's only phase one, and maybe have a discussion on what it would do financially to the county for looking at phase 2, 3, or 4, whatever building plans we have. So that's something I'd like to
Mr. Chairman,
have on there. Yes.
We just had the ad hoc building committee meeting, and we're going to bring a resolution back to the committee to proceed with schematic design, which would bring us a better cost figure on phases 2, 3, and 4. So that I think that falls right in line with kind of what you're discussing.
Okay. Yes. Any other goals the committee members would like to see on there?
I guess this is Murphy's Chairman. I guess I would like, I don't know if it's appropriate in this committee or not, for a goal is to see us be able to record our own meetings, including county board meetings, even when we get away from virtual and go back to the boardrooms. I think that, especially in this time, people want to know what we're doing, and I don't think we have the opportunity to know what we're doing actually. So I appreciate that if we would do something like that.
I would agree. Since we oversee the admin and IT departments, I think it's appropriate to put that on as a goal. And I don't know if there's Casey, is there a drop dead date? This is something you want to put into the budget plan, I would assume, right?
Yeah, and we can, we've got a couple more cracks at this. So depending on how much you guys want to meet on this, but we'll be looking at the budget presentation. And I'd say once we hit the budget presentation, then we want to be pretty well finalized. So probably looking at another month before we get to that point. So if you guys want to think on them some more, definitely have an opportunity to do that.
Okay. 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 Any other discussion? If not, before we adjourn, I don't know what the availability of everybody is for Monday or Tuesday meeting next week.
It sounds like at 10 a.m. next week we have a meeting scheduled in the community center, so we can do a complete virtual if we want to do that. If that works for everyone.
10 a.m.
Next Monday, is that right, Cheryl? Yeah,
Yeah.
Monday there's the 28th at 10 a.m. there's a meeting scheduled in here. But we could do a meeting on Zoom, and it wouldn't interfere with that if that works for everyone.
Works for me.
That'll be closed session, so it'll open in public session and then close. And then it'll be to discuss the union contract. And then the reason we would like it Monday or Tuesday is the negotiating team has another meeting set up with them on Wednesday. So we'd like to review it. It was supposed to be on today's agenda, but unfortunately that didn't get conveyed over to get put on today's agenda.
So Monday at 10 o'clock, does that work for everybody else?
Think so.
Work.
Okay.
Oh,
And then
Bob would like to go earlier if possible. 9? 5 in the morning.
I don't think I can go any earlier than 10, though.
Okay.
I
Pete
have
can't
an
go any
appointment.
earlier. Pete
I
can't
have
go
an-
earlier than 10.
I have an appointment in the morning.
Can you make 10 work? Okay. Bob can make 10 o'clock work.
Okay.
Thanks,
So
Bob.
we'll have that on. Okay. So we'll work on the agenda. That one thing, we might put the budget on there just in case there's some questions there and if anybody wants to ask some, so.
We also need to set up the October meeting. It wasn't set up. A regular meeting.
Okay. Do we want to wait till Monday to discuss that?
I will not be in attendance to that. Casey's going to take minutes, and that's fine. You can just let my department know.
Okay. 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 We'll discuss that and look at your calendar, so. Okay.
Cheryl, I thought we had an admin and finance committee meeting already scheduled for early October. It's on my agenda.
I do not see it on our calendar, and I don't think it was on the last agenda.
Okay, maybe I just wrote it down. Okay.
I mean, October 2nd is probably what we're going to go for. if that works for everybody else.
That's the same week that you're having a Monday meeting.
I know, but I'm out of town the week of the 5th, so.
Okay,
So
And the county board meeting is on the 13th,
okay,
correct?
yes.
Yeah, we're a week early on
Yeah.
the county board this time.
Yeah. So we'll plan on the 2nd at 9 o'clock if that works in everybody's, but we'll confirm that on Monday, so.
Okay.
Okay. Otherwise, with nothing else on the agenda, we'll adjourn until Monday at 10 o'clock for a closed session meeting, so.
sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you all.